RIU Knit Podcast.
Episode 9.
Lionel Peiris, Nasr-Eldin Ayoub-Bey, Zalia Zogheib, with Roshan Madawela.
Together shed light on the global tourism amidst an ongoing genocide case study of Sri Lanka.
Welcome to RIU's next podcast. June 2025. Today, we're here to discuss a really important issue, which is tourism, and more specifically, tourism in Sri Lanka in the context of a genocide which is unfolding around our eyes. So it's quite important to understand where this is coming from. Sri Lankans, just like everyone else in the world, have been out on the streets marching because what they have seen and witnessed has appalled them, and be small numbers, but they have been on the street marching. And then at the same time, we've seen the government of Sri Lanka openly welcome more and more numbers of tourists from Israel, in particular IDF soldiers who've just come back from serving in what is now widely believed to be war crimes. In that context, we're very lucky to be joined by three distinguished panelists. Start with Lionel. Lionel's formerly part of the Church of Ceylon and a very active member of the Free Palestinian movement in Colombo. Hi, Lionel. Next, we have Zalia, who's a curator and a researcher and a presenter, and she's a Palestinian. She has Palestinian ancestry, but also Lebanese and French, I believe. Truly international. Hi, Zalia, and she lives in Sri Lanka. And we have Nasr-Eldin from London, CEO of ICG, Islamic Finance Conferencing, and he is joining us. He has also had a back office in Colombo for the last 20 years, and he's a frequent visitor to Sri Lanka as well. Welcome to all of you. Right. Just to get things going, I'm going to start by giving a little bit of information and background to the issue at hand. Nissan, can you play the first set of economic slides? Just to show the critical importance of tourism to a country like Sri Lanka. And you can see that at its peak, just before the COVID lockdown and the terror attacks, tourism was contributing as much as 5% to GDP. So we're looking at like $4 billion US dollars per year. And one of the reasons why the country went bankrupt is due to the fact that there were no tourists coming in during the COVID years, and that sadly Sri Lanka doesn't really have an industrialization policy, nor does it have many sources of export revenue earnings. So tourism is critical, as I mentioned. So when tourism ground to a halt, the economy suffered from a lack of foreign exchange, which led to a sovereign debt default that we all know about now. Next slide, please. Then, where are these tourists coming from? At the moment, tourism is doing great. If you look at this chart here, you'll see India, Russia, China, UK, France, Germany leading the way. And these have been the traditional tourism markets for Sri Lanka. Next, please. And then our research team here dug up some data on Israeli tourism, which seems to be at an all-time high at the moment, since last year in particular. So this is what we're looking at now. And there are many, many, many issues and complexities and very, very serious concerns that my panelists will hopefully shed some light on. But first, let's start with context. Very important. So I'm going to start with Zalia. Can you give us a little background into the whole the whole beginnings and where we are in terms of the apartheid state of Israel. Over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Roshan, and thanks for introducing and organizing this. So I just want to start with a couple disclaimers. First of all, I'm not a historian, so please take what I'm saying with your own grain of salt, your own wisdom. This is all research I have conducted. This is based on my own personal knowledge. As you said earlier, as a descendant of Palestinians, my grandfather was part of the 1948 Nakba, which I will discuss in a little more detail in a second. So it's based on my parents' experience, who are Lebanese Palestinian. It's mostly based on research I have done, just looking up actual historians who discuss this. So I recommend to everyone to actually do their own research, and there's lots of really good resources online, which I'm happy to share after this. And but if you want two excellent historians, you can start by looking at Salman Abu Sitta, who's a Palestinian historian. You can look at his books, and you can look at Ilan Pape, who is an Israeli historian, and both of them do an excellent job of relating the creation and the continuation of the apartheid in Palestine by the Israeli state. So the second disclaimer is I would like to just make sure everyone understands that Zionism and Judaism are two very different things. Zionism is an ideological, politically motivated and financially motivated movement that was created in the 18th century and was actually put into action at the end of the 19th century. So it's actually a very recent movement and is comparatively to Judaism, but that has used Judaism and the oppression of Jews across the world as an excuse and a way to propagate their agenda. So I think it's important that we clarify this. So just for context, I'll try not to go on for too long. There's a lot of details to this, but basically, the first thing you need to know about Palestine, and I think this is interesting to Sri Lankans, is how similar it is to Sri Lanka in the context of it being a strategic geographical space in time, in history, and in commerce, right? So it was at the right in between Asia, South Asia, and Europe, and it was on the trade routes between India and Europe. So it's very, very well placed for anyone who wants to control these trade routes, right? And it was under Ottoman Empire control in the 1800s, and that's when we start seeing, so at the like 1799 actually, you'll see Napoleon tried to take control of Acre, which is in Palestine, and Gaza and Jaffa, that were all already in Palestine. So he tried to come in from Egypt and take control in order to disrupt the trade routes for the British, who were using with the Indian East, I think it was Indian East Company, and getting all the trade routes through there. He failed, but it's just a really good example to show how important that land is geopolitically, and it's been the case for centuries. So what happened after that is we can see already from that point on talk about, and this comes from different places, but mostly from the Zionist side, talk about the Holy Land and how Jews, so this is happening in parallel, sorry to interrupt myself, but in parallel, we have a lot of violent discrimination against Jewish people in Europe, across Europe, especially in Russia, but even in Western Europe, it's very, very common. So there's this movement that's being created on the side saying, oh, you know, Jewish people need a safe haven for them to be. And one of the big advocates of Zionism is Theodor Herzl. I'm sure you've heard of him. He basically advocated for a Jewish land in Palestine, because Palestine is the Holy Land if we refer to biblical texts, right? So Theodor Herzl is not a religious man. He's actually quite secular and quite politically minded and quite business minded, right? So what does he start doing? He starts going to people like the Rothschilds. I think it was Edmund Rothschild who first started financing his campaigns to advocate for a Jewish state in Palestine. And he doesn't stop there. He actually talked to a lot of stakeholders at the time. He talked to the British, he talked to the French, basically just doing the work of a lobbyist and getting financial backing to then start bringing Jewish refugees into Palestine. So that was happening all throughout the 19th century into the 20th century. They were slowly bringing in Jewish refugees into Palestine while Palestine was under the British mandate, right? And that was only made possible because the British were controlling Palestine at the time, right? So they're bringing in Jewish people slowly, and through that, Zionism grows as not just a movement, but an actual group of people who want to create an independent state in Palestine. And they don't care that there's already people there and there's already a state. No one cares about that, right? They just keep going. And it's really practical because then that allows Western powers to have their own state in the Middle East, in this incredibly strategic space in the planet, even if, you know, in the midst of, I'm jumping over a lot of things, and I again recommend that you go and do your own research, but this is all very available online. There's a really great documentary called The Palestinian Catastrophe. It's on Al Jazeera, it's Al Nakba. Please look it up. It details all of that really, really well. But essentially, what is happening is the British are going through their own era of decolonization, where they're leaving their colonies, but they want to keep a stronghold on their resources and the trade. So what they do is they realize, well, thanks to Zionism, we can actually create a state here that will allow us to keep control on the region, and that will work in our favor as long as we stroke their back. So you get Lord Balfour, who is essentially a representative of the British government, who then goes and writes a letter, I believe, to the Americans to get financial backing, and then they come back and they help them out. The Americans get involved, and we get in 1948 the State of Israel, the creation of the State of Israel. Now, all of this is made possible because when the British leave, they leave all of their weapons with the newly created Israeli militia, which then goes around Palestine. It starts in April 1948. Actually, it starts in 1947, but the biggest part of the violence starts in April 1948 into May, all the way to October. And you get about 150,000 Palestinians who are displaced, who lose their lands, are forced off their lands, and that includes my grandfather. So my grandfather was a farmer in the north of Palestine, in the Galilee, and him and his entire family, they were not wealthy people, but they had lots of land. They would grow olive trees and fig trees, and they had a decently sized house. We had our ancestors' graves. We're on the land. This was our land that we had for generations. So one day, Israeli soldiers showed up at their door and with guns and explained that they had 24 hours to leave or they would all be killed. So now, geographically, the Galilee is in the north of Palestine. So the safest and quickest place to go at the time was Lebanon, the south of Lebanon. So that's why you have some of the biggest Palestinian refugee camps, including Ain al-Hilwa, which is where my grandfather and his family went, is in the south of Lebanon. And, you know, bear in mind, please, because this is very important. A lot of people like to say that the Palestinians left or sold their land or all this nonsense. The truth is they left because, like, the big majority of them was threatened. There were massacres, people died, so they were basically trying to protect their family. And they left thinking, this is a war, this is temporary, this will end, we will come back. So that's why we know to this day a lot of Palestinians still carry the deeds of their houses, they carry the keys to their houses, because they thought, we will come back. And actually, in our family, we know the story of my grandfather, who tried to come back 6 months later and was shot in the arm. Him and his brother tried to come back. It was impossible. So, after years, the diaspora was created and people had to keep living, right? But that is basically an introduction to how the state of Israel came to be in 1948.
Thank you, Zalia. That's very painful to listen to as well. But thank you for sharing that. I mean, your family's been through it, right? So, and Naz, I saw that you wanted to say something. You need to unmute. You need to unmute yourself. Yeah. No, you're muted. Naz, you're muted.
Hello?
There you go. Yeah.
Oh, I thought that you'd muted all of our mics in there because I wanted to interject. Zalia saying something very, very, very important when she said about how, once number one, was it ever for the British to give away anybody's homeland, and number two, how this whole thing, the notion that there was no people there before. This has been the biggest con that they've played on everybody, including the Jews themselves, and the impact today that we've seen, the backlash to this outrageousness. How do you create a state for somebody by displacing another people? Yeah, how can that ever be something that any good will come from? And so what you said about the Zionists, they've also conned the real Jews, for want of a better expression. And what we're seeing in London and around the world in the protests, that there's a big section of those protests are those very Jews themselves who don't accept what's been happening in their name. And what's also happened, as if you want to call it karma thing, is that people are now becoming aware. Even if you look at some of the young American Jews and American Jews who are brainwashed from a young age, taken on free trips to Israel, Palestine, I should say, yeah, and they are now becoming aware of the reality of the Nakbas that happened. And I even saw a very harrowing documentary the other day with some soldiers who survived, Israeli soldiers, boasting about what they did in 1940. I mean, horrendous. And then you're having I can only talk from a UK perspective. You put whenever you watch anything to do with the current genocide that's happening now, the journalists all turning as well, because it's been rammed down people's throats. This whole thing that you can't say a word against Israel without being called anti-Semitic. Yeah, but now the horrific they've been so drunk on this notion of being chosen and being able to do what they like to people is backlashing on them. Also, the Western media have realized that this is the Israeli state, the state of Israel has lost. They're never going to be able to kill all the Palestinians, because Palestinians have got this innate kind of, they can never finish everybody as much as they try, and they've lost how do you say, they've lost the room. Everybody knows, no matter what they say, people who had no interest whatsoever, and we have to capitalize on that, and especially with regards what we see in the tourism arena. I noticed, I live in northwest London, where Roshan is hails from also, yeah. And near us is quite a large Jewish community, and we're seeing that a lot of it. I don't quote me on this, but I know that in war, I also have an issue about war. You can't call it a war, really. One side has no weapons, has nothing, and the other side the most recent technology. Anyway, the soldiers are given time off, and they've been and they're coming to London, and they go into places like Thailand, and they go to places like Brazil. Is it the foundation of the young girl? What's it called? Who'll be monitoring this? What's her name again? Roshan, the young girl that was there's something
the lawyer.
We talked about this earlier. Sorry.
The excruciatingly annoying lawyer who defends the Israel government.
No. I'm talking about the foundation that's been the
Hind Rajab Foundation. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, they've been doing a fantastic job on monitoring and catching these soldiers in the various locations. You've seen some of the clips in Thailand and whatnot, but what hasn't happened has been those countries been able to actually convict or catch these people. They're made aware and they managed to slip out of those countries. In fact, we have 2 weeks ago in the UK, a group of prominent lawyers who have approached the police to investigate 10 UK nationals who went and fought with the IDF. This is where all of our Sri Lanka, the UK, we have to put pressure on the governments to implement this. This is going to be very, very important moving forward. You know,
Absolutely, yes.
Not least for the fact that aside from the issue at hand, which is the Palestinian people's issue, they pose a great danger in the places that they go. You know, so I just want to interject earlier to say that. So
you know, Naz, you're absolutely right. Lionel just literally a few minutes ago said just as complicit as the UK is in supplying components to weapons, Sri Lanka is complicit in mentally rejuvenating them after trauma of war crimes to go back and commit some more. Right?
Sri Lanka, not alone. So, many countries, and then, so a lot. That this is where we have to apply pressure. We have to apply pressure because the governments of said countries, Western countries in particular, they've lost the people. I mean, I don't quote me this, but I'm quite confident that most people in England today, Britain today, are now totally against what's happening there. I mean, anyone who watches,
you're right. Yeah.
Anyone who watches a clip of what's going on, any sane person who has a conscience will be obviously against. Yeah. And the British government are playing a very dirty game. On the one hand, now they're seeing that where everything's pointing, and they're now pretending to sort of start caring. We have to really keep them on there. We have to really. I'm very concerned about this because now all of a sudden now people are recognizing what's going on. You know, as good as that is on one front, we have to see the ones who are the false pretenders, the ones who don't really. You know what I'm saying?
I think they're trying to save their own skin, and they're probably exit strategy to blame Netanyahu and put it all on him.
Absolutely.
And say, you know, Israel's okay, but it was him, right?
Netanyahu and those other 2 or 3 matters he's got in his cabinet, you know, those far right guys. I don't even want to say their names, to be honest. Yeah.
No. Yeah. So, Lionel, can you bring us to Sri Lanka and the brief history with Israel and some of the amazing points and observations that you made, which you shared with me earlier?
Yeah, just a few little pointers. I appreciated your presentation, Zalia, you know, of the history of it. Just one or two things I would just like to bring because it's relevant. And that is that when Theodor Herzl was trying to get support for the idea of the Jewish home, the homeland, he was very clever, and he said that the future Zionist state of Israel would be a bulwark to protect the Western culture with the Western way of life, the Western attitudes and cultures and so on and so forth, from Oriental barbarism. In other words, to protect the West. So Israel had to be Western. It's a part of the Western world.
Lionel, to back your point, they often use that. They often say we're the only democratic state in the region.
Can I complete? You see, I think that this thing about democracy and so on, I don't take it very seriously, because Israel is a neo-colonial construct. It is a construct of the American and the Western and the British Empire, then the American Empire. So it's a construct. Indeed. And its democracy is a very tarnished democracy, very much like our democracy is a very tarnished one. Because after the British handed over, I don't say independence, handed over power to their local puppets.
Yes.
The Nayakas and the Jayawardhanas and the Vijayawardhanas and the Bandaranayakas and that whole class, right? It was not a democracy. Ostensibly, they pretended they used the words like democracy, but it wasn't. It was the continuation of a neo-colonial rule, a colonial rule, right? And therefore, I really don't see, and in all colonial countries, there is a kind of an apartheid. There is a kind of division. There is a class system, and the twain shall never meet. There is a very big divide. There is the employer and the employees, the rulers and the indigenous people, or the Westerners and the down at the bottom. And Israel is very much like that. It's not a democracy. And that is the media, what do you call it?
Smokescreen.
Media misinformation.
Yeah.
Very clever propaganda. In other words, not only is Israel the great protection of the civilized world, which is Western, white, so there was a white supremacy. It had to be protected, and Israel was the best bet. It was the bulwark. So it was important to finance Israel and to keep it going and to make it flourish and to get all the propaganda and so on and so forth. That's one thing that I would like to say. And I think that is important, because there was this imperialism, the imperial sort of way, and I use Marxist categories. Not only am I a Marxist, I will quite say that definitely, that there is a class system and a class structure, and an understanding. If you look at Marx and Richard Wolff, who speaks very beautifully, he's a Marxist economist in the United States, who does some superb studies of the whole economic approaches, because the economy is something we neglect, the economic power that is there, and the importance to protect that. And I feel that the way that is the Zionist state of Israel. Now, what I did learn from my visit to Palestine in the Second Intifada, I went on a fact-finding mission, was something very, 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 I found it astonishingly beautiful. That the average Palestinian was very savvy. They knew what was happening. They understood the situation. And I remember when we talked to quite a lot of average Palestinians, not from highly educated academic backgrounds, quite normal, simple people. They knew who the danger people were. They said, we are not afraid of the Jews, no problem. In fact, Israel needs to be liberated. They actually said that. Israel needs to be liberated from this false ideology of Zionism. But they also went on to say, our real enemy is the United States of America. They are the ones who pull the strings and control us. And what was amazing was that they knew what was happening in the rest of the world. They knew, when they asked me where do I come from, and I said Sri Lanka, they said, oh my gosh, you've had a lot of problems in ethnic crisis. They knew about the war. They knew about the different Tamil militant groups. One of our delegation was from South Africa, and my question, they knew what was happening in South Africa. What was astonishing was that the average Palestinian was very well informed. And what the third feature I would like to mention is, they were secular in their thinking. We met some of those who would later become Hamas. And they came from a strongly Islamic background. But they stood for the rights of the Christians and the rest of the people. George Habash was a socialist and a Marxist. There was a wonderful sense of balance. And the future, their vision for the future was one in which all people would be equal, that it would be a secular state in which religious and other ideologies would not play a part. And it was very inspiring to listen to them. And the fourth factor I saw in the movement in Palestine was that everyone was working together. Different factions, different groups with different ideologies, men and women. There's a tremendous women's movement. There were, what do you call it? They were all working together to form a new economy that would be free of the domination of the capitalist structures from Israel and the control of markets. They said, we must make our own cloth, we must make our own things, and to discover their own culture in that process. And they were working together. Age-wise, children, everyone was involved. The little children were the ones who threw the pebbles and stones at the soldiers. There were the spotters. And they all worked together. There were doctors, there were professionals, they were highly educated. Look at the number of universities, Birthside University and many others. They were highly educated. And I think that we have to keep these in mind. The Palestinians actually helped some of the Tamil militant movements in this country. Plot, for instance, was trained in the Lebanon by George Habash's crowd. They were to resist what you call the incursions of the Sri Lankan army. So they were very much involved, and I think that is one of the marvelous things that I learned about Palestine and the Palestinians and the Palestinian movement and Palestinian history. I mean, I think as Zalia has pointed out, I mean, from the 1920s earlier, even earlier, there were flourishing markets and flourishing cultural developments in Palestine. Palestine was a highly civilized, highly advanced culture and economy. They had the railways going all around the empire, from Jaffa. You know, I mean, it is astonishing. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I just want to make that corrective. But I really appreciate what you said. I think what I'm really very worried is that the Israeli government today, backed by its Mossad, of course, and sad to say, in India under Modi, and of course the United States and most of the Western countries, have their geopolitical interests about Sri Lanka. We're having a lot of tourists coming through. Are they tourists? Is a question we need to ask ourselves. These are young people who are obviously serving in the army. They're coming out, having been exhausted by the war, perhaps, or perhaps traumatized. They're coming here, and there is a chain of places in this country established by Israeli interests called Kavad House, for instance, in Colombo, Green Park, Alvis Place, all over, and Ayoub-Bey, and down south. And these are there to help, and they are, by the way, they are registered under the Business Undertakings Act, not as religious organizations. And what are they? So who is spending the money, paying for the investment? Not answered.
Lionel,
right?
Can I offer to play a couple of clips to support what you're saying? Because the Free Palestinian movement, as you know, has been under attack by sponsored groups, AI, sounding Indian, as Zalia pointed out, and even Buddhist priests have been presumably paid to go out with Israeli flags in Colombo. I mean, what a ridiculous thought, right? Niflan, can you run us through a couple of the clips of the propaganda that's been out there?
And I don't know whether many people are aware that while the British government of the time of Balfour and so on, that period, were thinking of setting up a Palestinian, a Jewish homeland in Palestine, they were considering other areas in the world as well.
Ah, yes.
And I don't know whether you're aware that Ivor Jennings, the founder of the Sri Lankan University and the author of the first constitution, the Salisbury Constitution, actually wrote to the British Foreign Office and suggested Sri Lanka and pointed out that the Trincomalee area would be wonderful. This was in 1947.
Wow.
Right? We escaped by a thread. Right? And the poor Palestinians had to pay the cost of that, and for which I apologize profusely. But 1947, yes. And but don't think that this is only short term. There was a long-term interest in establishing control, and Trincomalee is a very sensitive area. We know that. It's the eastern province. And it's fascinating that the influx of tourists and the establishment of houses like Kavad House and so on and so forth are based in those key areas. And the tourists who come go through R&R and mental refreshment and stabilize and then sent back to go and kill Palestinians. So we are complicit. The Sri Lankan government, right, in its naive expectancy that is going to help our recovery, our economic recovery, are actually not, because they're not making much money, because all these payments are paid in Israel and outside. So we're not getting much money here. But there is money invested by certain interesting powers, like I think the Israeli government and perhaps other interests, to control. And what are the business undertaking under the Business Undertakings Act? What is their business? To provide religious space, a place of synagogues for people to worship. Now, who's going to worship? There are no Sri Lankans who are practicing Judaism. Not as far as I know. Right? It is for those Israeli tourists who come out. In other words, IDF soldiers who are coming out for rest and recreation. And not only do they come in and get R&R and get perhaps mentally help to get back and go back and be a firm Zionist, but they also are occupying areas in the eastern province. A lot of our Free Palestine movement people have gone and done some research there. The beach area has been totally taken over by Israeli tourists. Locals are not allowed there. Other tourists from other countries are not allowed there. They dominate it. They're boisterous, they're thuggish, they are rude, and they're taking over small businesses, they're controlling them using their powers. A lot of little cafes and all have Israeli flags. It's happening.
Actually, on that subject.
Yes, please say, Zalia. Yeah.
Sorry?
The Spanish tourists, right?
Yes. So there's a lot of, this is not the first time this has happened. I'm sure you know this, Lionel. It's actually happened in the past in Goa, and it's currently also happening in Thailand, in the island of Pai. And what I think is concerning, and maybe Roshan, you'd like to play some of the clips we have after this, but I think what is concerning is the similarities and the consistency. Because I myself, I love the South Coast. I've not been to the East Coast, but like you said, Lionel, the East Coast is particularly fragile. It's not incredibly developed when it comes to tourism. It is home to a population that maybe has a little less means than in the rest of the island. So these are even more vulnerable populations than who we have in the South. But the South is also being overrun. I went to Hiriketia not long ago and was speaking to one of the local shop owners. So it's actually one of those restaurants on the beach. They're locals, they're from the area, they're very kind. And we were having a chat, and I had noticed the disproportionate amount of Israeli tourists around us, because I can recognize Hebrew when I hear it, and I'm very sensitive to these things. And I had not even brought it up. I did not want to bring it up. This is not something that I enjoy talking about in my spare time. If I'm on the beach, I'm on the beach. I want to relax. And he was telling us these groups of Israeli tourists are coming, and they are ordering, these are young people ordering lots of food and alcohol, and then they're running away and they're not paying their bills. And I was shocked to see exactly, almost word for word, the same testimonies in Thailand, in Goa.
Because Zalia, because they share the same mindset. They feel privileged. As I said earlier, they're drunk on this notion of being chosen. You see,
the settler mentality, right?
Have you seen that the video of it's been going around a lot in Thailand, where there's a young girl, she's sitting there, she said, my money bought this. But my point, the point I want to make though is the International Court has deemed these IDF soldiers have committed war crimes. So now it's imperative on the government, seeing as they're not hiding themselves. As Lionel mentioned and you have mentioned, you know in particular the places that they are operative and in fact buying businesses and whatnot. Then it becomes incumbent on us to put pressure on our governments to implement what the rulings of the international court and take this, catch these people and hold them responsibility. That
100%.
I don't. What's happening, you guys, in that regard in Sri Lanka? In that regard, Roshan, is the government doing anything in that regard?
I think that's our cue to play a couple of videos. So we start with the propaganda video, Naz, and then we have some of the clips that we took ourselves at various protests at outside the US Embassy. And there was a Niflan, can we have a look at those, please? We just try and skim through them.
You're muted, Lionel. Yeah. Lionel, you're muted. Roshan,
Videos,
Lionel's trying to speak, but he's on mute. Hello?
Yeah. Can we play the videos, guys?
Yeah. Okay, now. Kavad House and other organizations, right? The Kavad House movement is international. It's in Brooklyn, the headquarters, New York, and it has enormous funds. And it is funding these and setting these up as business things. Now, what is their purpose? They bring in a very right-wing ideological Zionism, right, which is racist, which is genocidal, and which is very supremacist. What are the local counterparts in this country? We've got the extreme nationalist movements in our country, like the Sinhala Buddhist nationalism, the Desha Premi movements, the Sinhala Rave, and all kinds of organizations like that. And it is very interesting to investigate the links between Kavad House and the Israeli presence in this country and these extreme nationalistic organizations, like they're involved in India with the Modi government and with other parts of the world. I'm not sure about Thailand, and I'm not sure about those things. There could be movements like that as well. There are, I believe. Now, this is very dangerous because their geopolitical interests also come up. They want to destabilize the country. I don't know whether the government is quite wise or are they being naive. I think they need to really seriously go into these matters carefully with good people with analytical minds to realize that this is a very dangerous situation. That is one point I would like to make. The second point is...
Who are putting pressure on the government? Is there any entity that's putting pressure on the government to do what you say? Are there any entities that are taking this task on board to do what you say?
Well, there have been movements in this country, the Freedom for Palestine movement, for one. Then there is the other movement working towards against the abolishment for the abolishment of the PTA Act and to change our constitution. There are movements that are raising these issues,
right?
And I'm not sure. Pardon?
No, I said right. I'm following what you're saying.
My question is this: I think there's another thing that is. The Sri Lankan government has, for a long period of time, certainly sided with Palestine, and they said we are for Palestine and we are in solidarity and so on. But there is no action to support it. All the United Nations resolutions say that we must act to bring those resolutions into action, to in a sense to work for the liberation of Palestine. And we need to sever our links with Israel, diplomatic links, and any trade links whatsoever. Some countries have done it. The little Maldive Islands, a tiny little group of islands, have banned Israeli tourists. Yes. And that little island
exactly. Yes. Tourism. Exactly.
It's not your tourism, right? And there has got to be some kind of no double speak. We can't be shedding crocodile tears on the one side and saying, oh, poor Palestine, Palestinians, they're being butchered, they're being this and so on and so forth. Yes, I feel horrible. I cry. But on the other hand, we're shaking hands, the bloodied hands of butchers.
Yes.
And doing this with them and sending our labor from here to go and work in Israel.
Where they are abused.
Huh?
Where they are often abused.
that I don't know. But anyway, they are in need and they go, right? The former government did it and so on. And I think you can trace a lot of these things, this kind of policy shift and this attitude towards Israel from 1978, when Mr. J.R. Jayawardena won the elections, and he and his son Ravi Jayawardena were instrumental in bringing Israeli experts to train our troops, to our intelligence organizations, whole military structure. And I don't think we should be naive to think that they have ceased to do so. They have their puppets, they've got their molds within, they have got people on, they have won people over. And I think we've got to be not so naive, we've got to wake up and be a little shrewd and think. And I think the future of Sri Lanka can be very, very rocky if we do not sever our links with Israel and have nothing to do with it. As many countries are now demanding, even in England, there is a move. In some of the Labour, more radical Labour members, critical Labour members, are suggesting that there should be very stern action. So I think I just like to rest the case there, but others might like to resolve.
Just to step in, Lionel, just to support your point, the Israelis were actually caught training the rebel LTTE round the corner with the same weapons that they were selling to the government back in the 80s, right? And yeah, so we all know this. Niflan, can we please play that clip this time? So we just kind of get a feel of what's been happening on the ground. Yeah.
Jesse.
The Free Palestine movement.
So this is the propaganda clip that whoever, you know who.
The Free Palestine movement in Colombo and their controversial display of Hezbollah and Hamas banners. The Free Palestine movement in Sri Lanka has recently sparked threats and risk to our country, with their group's public display of terror banners in Colombo commemorating Hamas and Hezbollah, who are renowned international terror organizations. They should not be allowed to engage in any such activism in support of international terrorists, like Hassan Nasrallah, head of terror organization, bounties offered for their arrests, as they had perpetrated a threat to national security and complicit supporters who are funded by terror organizations and terror-supporting states.
I mean, this is complete
it's evident
nonsense.
That the same occurs here.
Needless to say. Yeah. If you pause it there, if you have a look at the logo that's been used by whoever these people are, where the Sri Lankan flag has been literally trapped inside the Star of David. Where did that come from? Right?
Subliminal. No, we're not even subliminal.
I think so.
Man.
Yeah.
Look at that.
It speaks volumes, actually.
Absolutely.
It's actually where we are as a government. That
they're stating exactly what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Let's skip through this. Yeah. Let's have a look a bit more.
Here in the Free Palestine movement in
There's a few
those
more.
Those who breach immigration laws and harass other legitimate tourists.
I'm Australian. We're not lying to the Palestine. We support to Israel. How who look at the Israel terrorists? Palestine terrorists. Israel is the #1 terrorist. I'm Australian.
Police must be deported. They can't engage in any such activism and violent protests whilst being on tourist visas. Government act expeditiously against anarchy mongers and terrorists should never be allowed.
We're not lying to the Palestine.
Nation's global, non-aligned, non-violent stance in international policy. Government must act expeditiously against anarchy mongers and terror supporters.
Just pause it there for a
violent
second.
Protesters
Just to reiterate, I mean, we've been to about 5 of these. I think Lionel's been to a lot more. There's never been anything but peaceful protests, people with Palestinian flags, right? And there's never been any kind of violence. I haven't seen anything. So these are lies, damn lies, Indian accents, AI, nothing to do with Sri Lanka. I don't know where these things are made. But what interesting is where they get this footage from. Are they having malls in there? Can we have a quick look at what actually happened? Some of our own clips, Niflan.
Those
I mean, I don't see where the threat is. Like, Yeah, it's
Roshan,
actually
Roshan.
maybe it's that little girl who they find threatening because they do seem to go after children, right?
Thing is,
Yeah.
because they're on the back foot, they don't want anybody to highlight the truth. So they try to silence the truth wherever possible, and it becomes more and more ridiculous. How can you sanction people not to, like in America now? You can't even suggest say anything against Israel. I mean, it's totally ridiculous, and it will have the opposite effect for them. Funnily enough, because people will object to this.
Yeah,
and as they are doing.
And actually, sorry, I was just thinking, and I was curious because Naz, you were asking earlier, are there any entities that are holding them accountable? Is anything being done in Sri Lanka apart from the Freedom for Palestine movement and these things? And I actually wanted to bring up one thing because Lionel, you mentioned the Shabad houses or Kavad houses. I'm not sure how I think it's Shabad, but it might be Kavad actually. The Kavad houses, who are, I think, all of them registered as commercial entities, correct? They are not actually registered as religious entities. No. Those that are registered, because some are not even registered. Some are literally just illegally put in place. Now, I think, because I thought something that could be useful and pragmatic, because it's come up quite a bit that there is a form of and it's quite scary. There's almost a form of naivete with the Sri Lankan community in Sri Lanka regarding the impact that these Israeli potential settlers could have in Sri Lanka. And I think, Lionel, you identified that very keenly, is that there's a real danger here, and there are patterns that I am seeing repeated over and over again and that are happening here. So maybe I saw somewhere, was it one of those, I think it was one of those videos that were shared earlier in the day. One thing that the government has said that the reason they're not investigating the Kavad houses more is because they have not received complaints, right? As long as there are no complaints, they can't do anything.
The legal process.
Exactly.
They have to engage. So, like as I mentioned earlier, in the UK, we currently have a situation where the London Metropolitan Police has been asked to investigate 10 British nationals who went to fight in Palestine. Okay, and that was taken up by a number of prominent lawyers. They've made that. So a similar vein, there has to be similar pressure to just speak to the government. The government in any country, unless they're given real hard, hard approach, they will always deflect. To suit their agenda,
Absolutely.
I can come in here quickly, and that is, I'll share a experience I had. Three of us, a priest and another friend of mine, we went actually into Kavad House down Green Path, and we met a spokesperson, a very charming person, and she was very. I mean, she didn't get angry. She didn't shout. She didn't. She wasn't rude. She was very polite, and that made it more chilling. When
Yes.
he said, what's happening in Palestine? What's happening? She said, all the news you hear is fake. All that you hear is fake, right? That's disinformation. And then she went on in the same calm, chilling tone of voice. The land belongs to us. God has given us that land, very quietly. And it is our duty to annihilate them, to them out, to drive them out.
Lionel, she has, that lady you mentioned, has two sisters here in the UK. One is the Israeli ambassador, and another one is a young lawyer who they both talk in exactly the same vein that you mentioned. They're cold. They say exactly what you say. When pushed, they say that we have to. The land is ours, and we must annihilate. Exactly when you push them.
But that 80%. A recent poll suggests that up to 80% of Israelis believe this this whole narrative
Of
that
course.
they can just push the Palestinians out of their own land,
You
which
know,
is incredible.
one of
Which
the
is
best
incredible.
commentators, I think, on this subject is Gideon Levy, the editor of one of the editors
Yes.
of Haaretz. And he said something like this. He said, the Israelis, shall we say, no, he put it this way. He took a parable of a person who is a drug addict. And he was comparing, how can you be the best friend of a drug addict? The United States claims to be the best friend of Israel. So he was taking that up. And he said, well, what is who is the best friend of a drug addict? To give you money or to put you into rehab?
Yeah. Or drug
Lionel, there's one additional factor that when it boils down to now, when it hits you in your pocket financially, okay,
Yeah.
we all see what's happening in America. We know with how strong that lobby that they have with AIPAC, yeah. And now people on the ground, veteran soldiers, people are saying, "Hang on a minute, we have a catastrophe happening in our own country with drugs." If you see any video of any major city in America, they're living in tents and they're drug addicts all over the street. Yet they're giving billions of dollars to Israel. People, even if they're not that maybe keen on the Palestinian issue per se, they are when it comes to their own pocket. So
Yeah.
this is also exposing them, very very well. And I think
Yes, that's it.
when Zalia mentioned about the communities where they are currently being poor communities, yeah, who are being somewhat displaced, this is an angle as well that has to be highlighted.
You see, Nasir, and can I just take this moment? You see, it's all a question of arms industry profit and the
Yes.
capitalist economy, right?
Absolutely.
And that is, there's no question about it, right?
Yes.
And the arms industry is making a fortune.
Absolutely.
They're getting richer and richer and richer. Israel is, I'm making a, what do you call it, a possible situation. I think even the Sri Lankan government is getting arms from Israel or from Israeli-owned companies, even aircraft.
Or the high tech technology, they're good on the old technology, So especially military technology,
So
it's not hardware. It's not hardware. They're very good with all of the software and all that kind of stuff. And if they don't get it directly from Israel, they get it from the Americans or the British.
And there's no doubt about this.
It's one big group.
And
But thankfully, the very brief war between Pakistan and India actually demonstrated that overly priced Western weapons are no longer having the final say on the battlefield. It's actually the Chinese weapons like the F-10 who seem to have leapfrogged the other technology, and they're much less. I think we're living in really interesting times. There's a lot changing.
Well, Roshan,
right now.
Roshan, to back your point, look at our friends, the Houthis in Yemen.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
With a few $300-400 drones, yeah,
knocking them out.
Yeah, you see.
But we don't seem to.
Careful! Don't say our friends. We might get a knock on the door, Naz.
Yes.
The point I would like to make is this, right? We need an imaginative approach, both in our own internal affairs to our economy, and also the question of building up a network of non-aligned people, nations.
Absolutely, yes, I agree.
And working on a different economy, not dependent entirely on the Western type of economics with the IMFs and the World Banks and so on, and to think in terms of something innovative, something different. We need imagination. I was talking to a very good Muslim friend of mine, and we were comparing the Quran and certain readings and so on and so forth. And I came across this one. I showed him this wonderful saying from a book called Micah in the Hebrew scriptures. And there is a vision of all the nations will come together, right, to Mount Zion, and they will give up war they will beat their swords into plowshares and their what you call spears into whatever agricultural equipment, and they will learn war no more. And then he goes on to paint a beautiful.
What a beautiful notion! What a nice idea!
What a wonderful picture! You know, we are still thinking in terms of, if you look at how our Sri Lankan defense policies, we must have a strong army. So we need guns, we need weapons, right? But whom are we fighting? What is the war that we're going to wage? You know?
Yeah.
Lionel, you know, you said that about this non-aligned movement that thinks out of this kind of Western mindset. I'm sure you've been following what's been happening in Francophone Africa with one gentleman in particular, Ibrahim Traore, and how he's broken out of that mold. This sort of. See, the thing is, the interesting thing about Israel is that they actually decided to keep their foot on the ground there. Everywhere else, they've controlled us through the World Bank and IMF, through these loans that you're never able to repay. But now we're seeing a movement, particularly in those ex-Francophone countries, who are breaking away, and they're doing wonderful things in their own with those resources.
You see,
so I think that there needs to be a connection between these people. That I'm backing you on what you're saying. If we see a sea change where these countries realize that they have more in common in solidarity, then we can break away from this Western greed mindset.
In Sri Lanka, we have a pseudo left-wing government which doesn't have the strength to act. Obviously, sorry. I was just going to say Ibrahim Traore actually represents an alternative, right? Sorry, Lionel.
For centuries, being a colonized country, like many other countries throughout the world, we have been brainwashed. We have been totally brainwashed. Our educational system has brainwashed us. That has been used to think that wisdom and truths and beauty and loveliness and advances only can come from the West. That we have nothing.
100%.
We are barbarians, and we've got to be. And so the Christian missionaries arrive with their Bible and so on, and trying to make us better people. You know,
Lionel, have you heard of the African writer? I believe his name's Ngugu. I think his name's Ngugu. He wrote a book in the 70s called "Decolonizing the Mind." Yeah,
of course.
Because
exactly.
we are all products of this. By the way, I mean I'm originally Sudanese. Yeah, my father's a retired doctor and oncologist, and he was educated in Khartoum University by English professors, and he speaks English like an English textbook, grammatically correct English. Yeah. So even there are times when we don't know it, that we are aligned to the West. Our notions, as you said, Lionel, of things being beautiful, of things being good, I think we don't respect our own, and this has to change.
I think the title of the book, Decolonizing the Mind, is very appropriate, right?
Absolutely.
Very appropriate.
Yeah.
In fact, Roshan, the Maldivian
look at post all our countries when they got independence. First thing they did, okay, not en masse, but most people send their kids abroad to come and study in England and in America.
Well, the privilege did that, yeah. Exactly.
And if you look at all of our military, the ones that took over, did the coup d'etats and took over, invariably they all trained in Sandhurst. That's not coincidence,
No, that's right. Actually, colonialism didn't actually end. The military colonialism gave way to financial colonialism.
Absolutely. World Bank and IMF work hand in hand to keep us suppressed.
You see, American capitalism and Israel. I don't make a difference between the United States and Israel.
No, they're one. 100%.
Their very system needs war. They need war. They need more and more wars.
That's right.
War is like their nutrition and their food.
Their drug.
Their drug.
Yeah.
And they can't do without it. If tomorrow, let's say for instance, if tomorrow some dream comes true, and an American president arrives who says, we're going to shut down the army, we're going to demobilize, the whole economy will collapse.
Yeah.
The whole economy will collapse because the army and the arms industry are the bulk or the bulwark, as it were, of the American economy.
Yeah. I mean, it's called a military complex thing of theirs. Have you seen those videos, Lionel, where there's swathes and swathes and swathes, acres and acres and fields in the Midwest of America, where they just have obsolete fighter planes, because in order to keep this fueled, every few years you have to make the current weaponry obsolete. So you have to bring out newer versions, and they'll just get stockpiled. If they don't sell them to the Arabs, that is. If they don't stockpiled in the desert.
And capitalism, this capitalist structure and this capitalist economy and politics, has committed genocide for centuries.
And really, yes.
Going back to even sort of historic archaeological times, Australia, America, the United States, the Spanish, what do you call it, colonies in Latin America and so on.
The African slave trade in Africa.
Zalia, are you there? Zalia? Because we were having a very interesting conversation. Yeah, we can't see though, about how Sri Lanka needs to decolonize its mind as well. First of all, you have to recognize that 300-400 years of colonial domination will have an impact. Recognize and understand it in order to find out how you can go about deconstructing it. Right, Zalia? You wanted to speak a few words on that? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And apologies for my camera. I'm just, I'm not having a lot of luck technology-wise recently, so apologies on that. I'm quite worried about, coming here with the perspective that I have and the understanding, and actually just in reference to what Lionel was saying earlier on in the talk, I was very touched by his perception of the Palestinian people as being people who are very thoroughly, sadly aware of what is happening to them and who is doing it to them. But actually the Palestinians were not always this aware. Okay, and in the beginning, they were kind and they were open, and they saw no objection to European Ashkenazi Jewish people joining that in Palestine. And I say this because there is a distinction, because we have had Jewish people in the Middle East for millennia. They have always been a part of the Middle East, and they've just been a minority because the Jewish people are a people of diaspora who have been all over the world.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And Ashkenazi Jews, European Jews, are from Europe. And despite that, the Palestinians welcomed them with open arms and eventually paid the price. And I hate to say this because I'm a pacifist who believes in, the beautiful tale that Lionel was talking about us all meeting on Mount Zion and letting go of war and weapons and just living all together. But that is not how the world works, unfortunately. And I think Sri Lanka is afflicted with something, which we discussed in the past, which is a form of internal colonization. I think a lot of, and that's not just Sri Lankans, that is anyone who's been through years, millennia, centuries of colonization. In the case of Sri Lanka, 450 years of colonization by 3 different colonizers. There is a form of passivity. There's a form of passivity here, which has also, I feel, demonstrated itself in the willingness that a lot of Sri Lankans that I've spoken to have towards saying, oh, well, we would be much better under the British, or, oh, we should let those Russian and Israeli tourists come in and have their businesses because they're bringing in money, which is actually factually incorrect, as we've discussed earlier. It's not the case. They are opening illegal businesses who are operating under are not paying taxes. So no, there's no money coming back to Sri Lanka in these ventures. And I think
Zalia, but actually what you're saying is what we're saying. It goes to the very heart of what we're saying about decolonizing the mind. There is a subconscious thing where a lot of people subconsciously have a love of the West or of the. So if you were a previous British colony, you can't help but have this attachment to the UK and some of the ways of the English ways. You know, you see them being more civilized than your own. You know,
absolutely, Naz, and I'm really glad to bring this up, because I think what it is that former colonies fail to understand that the fact that they are not succeeding today financially by their own means is not because they are incapable. It is because their previous colonizers, the British, the Belgian, have made sure that even though they have officially decolonized, they have never really decolonized. And just like you were saying,
Zalia,
yes,
you know anything about this young chap in Burkina Faso called Ibrahim Traore?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and
oh my goodness, you need to, if you want to see what you just described, how it's been played out and how he has been so far, and may God protect him, because they've tried about 20 times to assassinate him. He's starting to address the very subject that you're speaking on now. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Absolutely. No, but I agree. And this is a conversation I've had with my French friends, because I was raised and born in France, but I'm not by blood French. Yes. So a lot of my friends are just like me, children of immigrants, right? And one of my good friends, whose parents are from Cameroon, has very much openly said, you know, he's fed up. He said, I'm done. I'm done with my fellow Black friends. I'm done with my fellow Arab friends who all think that we should please the white man. I'm done.
Yes.
We have to please the white man. We will never please the white man.
Yes. Zalia, there's somebody that I think should be made compulsory reading for all school-going students, and that is Edward Said's Orientalism.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, 100%. That's amazing. It opens your eyes to this terrible that one has become sort of victim, and you don't. You enjoy your victimhood. You know, you think.
Yes.
Do you know how he breaks down Robinson Crusoe and how that plays in our mind between Man Friday and Robinson Crusoe, the sophisticated guy who's shipwrecked, the natural subservience of Man Friday, who knows his place. As soon as he meets Robinson Crusoe, that he has to serve him. You know, it's so clever, right? It's so clever.
It's a clever, systematic way of where they cover all bases, whether it be the arts, whether it be
literature.
Sorry,
literature, arts, the whole thing,
the whole caboodle. They cover all bases, so that you end up not even knowing. I mean, you and I, we both grew up in the UK, yeah. And whether we know it or not, there's certain things that let's be fair. There are certain things that are great about these places, but on the whole, there's so many people walking around with major chips on their shoulders and not loving who they are. It's a big issue.
No, that's true. No, I mean, you have to embrace development, knowledge, and progress. And if it's the West or China or whoever, we need to embrace it, but we don't do it by degrading your own culture or making yourself subservient at the expense of your own interest, right?
Absolutely.
Never do that. Yeah.
And another thing, I think tourism it must be examined carefully. The social and terrifying effects of tourism, because our local people become dependent on the Western powers that come out, the foreigner who comes, and there's a kind of playing up to that person, in a sense, playing a game, to get money.
Yes,
and we become victims again.
Yeah, compromise yourself. Yeah.
And even religions are, dharmas and spiritualities are distorted and lost, and terrifying treasures are just thrown away. And I think that we really need to do a proper study of tourism and how tourism can be done can we say, in a different way, perhaps.
Yes, actually, Lionel, that's the cue to remind everyone that our 1 hour podcast is now approaching 1.5 hours. So now let me summarize and I'll give it back to you guys for 1 minute.
You'll have to do a lot of editing.
I think I've learned so much from listening to you guys. In summary, tourism from Israel, which has grown exponentially over the last couple of years, comes with a lot of baggage, as Zalia said, not just in Sri Lanka, Goa, Thailand, and elsewhere, right? Including people starting their own business and catering to their own community, surf clubs, scooter hire, local businesses are being hit so hard when all they have is tourism to rely on, right?
Right.
But when hundreds upon hundreds, this is what we hear. I'm not making this up. You know, it used to be dozens, but now hundreds of former IDF soldiers come to Sri Lanka and they run their own things, run their own business. And they also enjoy police protection. I was speaking to Zali earlier, and there's a documented case of a Spanish surfer being physically assaulted. And when he went to confront him, the Israeli tourist was protected by the police, right? Yeah. So, okay, let's get to solutions, because that's what we're all about, right? None of us here are anti-Semitic or we're not racist, but we recognize that just like South Africa was apartheid, at school, you know, we marched for Nelson Mandela and got such a buzz when we managed to dismantle that, right? People power, call it what you want. If we're going to that moment here, which I hope we're going towards, it could also be a very dangerous moment, right? In 1 minute, could you guys tell me, A, how you see this unfolding, and B, should we be looking at countries like Sri Lanka, should they ban or should they be screening these types of tourists? Okay, I'll give you 2 minutes each. Let's go. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first if you don't mind. I don't think they should go down the route of banning anything, but scrutinizing and using the institutions as much as using the power of the people and aligning with other countries that are going through similar stuff, like in Africa and where else. You know, you mentioned Goa, and we mentioned Ibrahim Traore and Burkina Faso, and that kind of mindset. The institutions, the legal process is very important. You know, because these people are coming, they're breaking the law and all this and that's the best way. That's the best way to catch them, I believe. Yeah, I mean,
right.
So now Keir Starmer, giving you just digressing a little bit. Keir Starmer now has got a big issue in his hands because 10 prominent law firms, have petitioned the British police to investigate these 10 British nationals who went to fight in Israel. Yeah. So they're going to have to do something about it. Now, you flip that to the tourism arena. Your country, who bank on tourism, have to do the same thing with regards to IDF soldiers who are, on one hand, international court has said that they're committing war crimes. They have to you have to take them. They have to be arrested and taken through the process. And the ones who are setting up illegal businesses, so you don't want to go down the route of this like they do, which is just try and ban everything. And you know,
yeah, true.
You have to give them due process. Yeah, that's what I believe.
I hear that. Zalia, you want to add anything to that? Yeah.
I completely agree with Naz. I think it's very, very important in the face of such a muddled situation, because that's how Zionism thrives, is by muddling everything up, right? So absolutely due process. I know that in Sri Lanka there was a case of one person who was identified as having participated in the current genocide and who was sent back to Israel, I believe, and chased out of Sri Lanka. So we need more of these cases to happen.
But rather than chase them out, they should be kept and take and
agreed.
You know,
yes, absolutely. I think another thing we can also look at, and which feels almost maybe more accessible at this stage, is that the Sri Lankan government really has to focus on the regulations around tourism, and we cannot have tourists starting businesses and working illegally in Sri Lanka and taking the business of local people. This is just out of the question, and that is absolutely due process. So I think that should be something that the government really needs to focus on.
And anyone found guilty to be sent to wherever they... Yeah.
Well, I think...
Yes. Over to you, sir. Lionel.
Then I wanted to say what has been said by these two. Thank you very much. But I just like to say this, and that is, it's astonishing. If I were to apply for a visa, a tourist visa, or a visa to enter Australia, or New Zealand, or anywhere, there's a screening process.
Yes.
You're not automatically given a visa. You know, you have to fill up. You've got to say, where have you been? Have you spent the last few months of your life? What have you been doing? You know what I mean? I don't know whether the Israeli soldier who comes is asked whether he served in the IDF. He would have definitely. And then, of course, you've got to say, look, there's a war going on, and you were involved in that. Were you involved in shooting Palestinians?
Yeah.
And yeah, you know, come on. I'm sorry you can't enter because we don't want violent people in this country. People will call it distress. So there has got to be that screening, and you already mentioned that. The other factor that I feel is a long-term one. I think we've got to really revise our whole educational structure. I'm very happy with Harini and so on when they were canvassing. They were talking about creating a new political and new economic culture. Fine. Now, one of the aspects of that is, unfortunately, the nationalistic streak in Sri Lankan history was to say that we were a unitary state. We were never a unitary state. If you look at the history of Sri Lanka, we were regional. There was the kingdom of Jaffna, there was the kingdom of Kandy, there was the kingdom of Sabaragamuwa, and different parts. And they all had a relationship one with another, sometimes tense, sometimes, but otherwise it worked. And identities were maintained, you know. And I think that we need to think about that. And when some of these tourists and these foreign agencies come, now look, when they market their goods, if they're selling Rexona soap, let's say, what is the photograph they have of a woman with a white face? Mm-hmm. The lighter the better. Why not a dark face? Why not a Dravidian dark black face?
Absolutely.
Agreed. 100%. Yes.
So you have a sort of what do you call it? A sort of a highly rouged white face. Right. And you know,
Lionel, I like you a lot, Lionel. I like your way of thought, Lionel. Exactly right. Indigenous people promoting products in their own countries. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, gentlemen, when you next here, we can all sit down and have some English breakfast tea at Gold Face Hotel. I've actually got to run to the airport and pick up
I'd rather have a devil chicken, Roshan.
Devil chicken, it isn't. Right. So I think, thank you to all three of you, Lionel, Naz, Zalia. I think we should touch base again.
Nice to meet you all.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And a big thank you to our listeners.
Our next assignment is a barbecue at your place.
Agreed.
Give me a few days for that. You get a ticket. You get the ticket to come over.
Fly over. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thanks everyone. God bless.
Thank you.